This is the We Have a New President, Legal and Community Implications webinar. My name is Clara and I am your moderator. I am a CAM model of over 7 years and I am quite community involved. And I would like everyone to introduce themselves. Savannah?
Hi, I'm Savannah Sly. I'm a career sex worker. I'm the founder and co-director of New Moon Network, which seeks to channel funding into the movement for sex workers' rights here in the US. I also serve on the board of Woodhull Freedom Foundation, as well as the global steering committee of the Sex Work Donor Collaborative. Thanks for having me today.
Alison?
Hey, I'm Alison Boden. I am the executive director of the Free Speech Coalition. We are the trade association for the adult industry. Prior to that, I was in industry for about 20 years, and I'm very excited to be able to help our industry in this role now. Thanks for having me.
Larry?
Hello, and thank you, Clara and Corey, for putting this on. I'm Lawrence Walters. I'm with Walters Law Group. Our firm has been defending the First Amendment and advocating for the rights of adult content creators and producers and publishers for over 35 years. I'm also the general counsel for the Woodhull Freedom Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization advocating for sexual freedom as a fundamental human right.
Thank you, Savannah, Alison, and Larry for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And finally, Corey.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on what part of the world you're in. My name is Corey Silverstein. I manage a law firm called Silverstein Legal here in beautiful Detroit, Michigan. The sun is shining today. I've been in the adult entertainment industry now for 20 years. So 18 years I've been an attorney, but I hit the 20-year mark. So yeah, so really excited to be here, and we're really looking forward to today's presentation.
I just want to give a quick reminder before we get started. Thank you again, all of you, for your time and for attending. We just want to mention, please be on your best behavior during this webinar. We understand that this is a very emotionally trying time. Everyone has really strong feelings. We just want everyone to respect each other, be polite, be kind, try your best to listen, and remember that everyone is here to communicate.
All right, so we're going to jump right into it, everyone, because we got lots of stuff to talk about. But before we do, we have to talk about our sponsors. First, our main sponsor for today's event, Colin Roundtree, Angie Roundtree. I know you're both here listening and watching. And of course, their flagship product, shh.com. Both of Claire and I's crystal balls were broken. We had no idea who was going to win the election. So, hence why when we called it the ... we weren't sure who the president was going to be. But it was an important topic for us because what we were realizing is that people, even before the election actually happened, were voicing how concerned they were going to be for the adult entertainment industry. So then when Clara and I were picking our panelists for today, these panelists were specifically chosen because they are experts, leaders in our industry who are going to be able to talk to us today. And you're going to see, guys, that as we're doing today's conversation, the panelists are going to be talking amongst themselves. It's not, just, person talks. We actually are going to try to make this an interesting dialogue. The comments board is open. I encourage you guys to talk as we're, going. Please be respectful to each other. As Clara said, these are polarized times, and this is not a, this is not a one side or the other conversation. We're not here to be political. That is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is talk to you guys about, okay, Donald Trump has won the election. The Republicans have won the U.S. Senate. It appears that they're going to win the House of Representatives. I don't believe it's final yet, but I think it's getting pretty close. By the time you guys are watching this on YouTube and such later on, it probably will be over. But that's where we are, and that's why we picked the topic. And I truly hope that everyone uses this to actually cool down the angst a little bit. I know everyone, has a lot of anxiety and things have been pretty crazy, but we're doing this because we want to calm the nerves down a little bit and try to make your lives a little bit more pleasurable in the adult industry. Back to you, Clara.
And we can get started on some of our questions. I think, you know, a lot of people have been asking about the makeup of the Supreme Court in light of the election's results. It's an especially important U.S. Supreme Court, as oral arguments in the industry's battle against the age verification laws in Texas are scheduled in January, I believe. What do you foresee in terms of the court makeup for the next 4 years?
You know, this is where, Clara, we have to have a conversation, because there's, you know, a lot of things going on in the media, but, and again, this is opinion. There's always the chance that I'm wrong. And, you know, Larry and I have been lawyers for a while. Larry a lot longer than me. He's got more wrinkles than I do. And so our ability to, you know, be 100% correct in what we predict is difficult. But you hit it right off the, you know, right off the head. This is going to be one of the most important Supreme Court terms that the adult industry has ever seen. The reason being is that come January, the Free Speech Coalition has their challenge that will be going to oral argument on January 15th before the Supreme Court. Alison will be talking more about that later. But ultimately, in terms of the makeup of the Supreme Court, I actually, Clara, I do not believe in the next 4 years we are going to see any change in the Supreme Court, absent there being some sort of medical emergency. Obviously, in recent memory, we had Justice Ginsburg unfortunately passed away. She was an absolutely incredible mind, and departed us way too early. But absent there being some sort of medical emergency or death, I actually do not believe we are going to see any change in the makeup of the Supreme Court during this Trump term part 2.
And I think that sort of already answers my next question, which was that some Democrats have been calling for Justice Sotomayor to retire now in order for the Biden administration to select a more liberal justice. And obviously, you've made your opinion on retirement or death pretty clear in this.
Yeah. I don't like the idea of politicians calling for justices to be retiring. Now, the reason why they're doing that, Clara, is because Justice Sotomayor is 70 years old. And what the reason why certain Democratic politicians are calling for her to step down now is because they believe that if she steps down now, there would be enough time for the Biden administration to put another, hopefully in their minds, younger Supreme Court justice on the bench. But that mindset is kind of broken. You know, I call that a little bit more of the talking head mindset and a little bit of wishful thinking, because the truth is, Clara, today's November 12th. There's simply, first of all, Justice Sotomayor would never do that, in my humble opinion. And Larry and Alison, who's now getting her share of a lot of experience on the Supreme Court, also, you know, might disagree with that. But I do not believe there is any chance she's going to just voluntarily step aside. She loves being a Supreme Court justice. It is a lifetime appointment. And quite frankly, I don't, you know, really view 70 and you know, certain politicians that are calling her out for being old and should be, you know, retiring at 70 is a little silly, you know, because when you look at it, Justice Breyer retired at 83, Justice Kennedy retired at 82, Justice Ginsburg was 87 at the time of her passing. Justice Scalia was 79 at the time of his passing. So to make, you know, the suggestion that Justice Sotomayor should step down now in order for a politically motivated new candidate, I don't see it happening. And quite frankly, from a timing perspective, even if she did do that, there simply wouldn't be enough time, and the politicking that would go on at the Senate would prevent the hearings to commence. I don't even think they'd be able to get a vote in on time before the change of power kicks in on January 20th.
So I guess in the event of Justice Sotomayor, in the event of, let's say that Justice Sotomayor's pre-January 20th retirement and after, how could that potentially shake up the court if it did occur? I'm sorry for my
Well,
verbalization of that. That was a bit of a struggle.
no, you're doing fantastic. I struggle with the legal Latin terminology and names myself. Hell, some days I wake up, I don't know what my name is. But what I can tell you is that the fact is that Sotomayor, is it possible? Like I said before, is it certainly is there some chance that she could step down? Yeah, there is. If it happened now, obviously the Democrats would rush as quickly as humanly possible to get a candidate and have the hearings and try to appoint someone. I do not think it's possible, though. The timing is too tight. I just don't see it happening. But I mean, hey, I guess they say anything is possible. If she were to retire after Trump takes office for his second term, obviously we would be looking at Trump looking to appoint another conservative, which would shift the balance of the court, which is right now 6-3. That could change it to 7-2, which would obviously be a major victory for conservatives and potentially lead to some extremely conservative rulings. But the good news here for the industry who's listening to this, again, I do not see this happening. Absent there being some sort of medical emergency or death, I do not see any change or foresee any change in the Supreme Court during the next 4 years.
So on that front, even with media outlets reporting rumors that Justice Alito and Thomas will retire during Trump's second term, do you believe that that would also be something that wouldn't occur?
Well, so here's where it gets, again, we're talking about the talking heads on the media, and I saw those reports today. Alison actually was kind enough to we had a little bit of a dialogue earlier, private dialogue earlier. Justice Thomas and Justice Alito, say what you want about them, whether you agree with them, disagree with them. They love their jobs. They love being Supreme Court justices. Clarence Thomas he'll be on the bench, I suspect, until the day he passes. Justice Alito, who knows? But again, in terms of the talking heads projecting that either of those two justices are going to try to retire during Trump 2 to try to call it pack the court with two more conservatives, I don't see that happening either. It's a possibility, but we're talking slim. And again, this is where the media networks are I hate to say it, but a lot of the mainstream media networks have created a lot of the finger pointing, highly polarized conversation. And this is a little bit more of that. If you sat down with either Justice Thomas or Justice Alito, I suspect neither of them would tell you that they have any intention of retiring anytime soon.
That makes sense. So I guess in terms of the US Supreme Court's decisions, do you feel that President Trump being in office will have any impact on the mentality or decision-making process of those justices?
Well,
or anyone on
we
the
have a lot
Supreme
of, that's a great question. And I'm going to make it quick because we have so many other topics we want to jump into. But, really quick, I actually don't. I'll tell you why. The justices that are on the Supreme Court, regardless of whether you agree with their views or not, and I am not suggesting here for a second that I'm in agreement with many of the Supreme Court decisions that have come out in the last few years, because I am not. But ultimately, what I can tell you is that these are very intelligent, strong men and women on the Supreme Court, and I have to remain optimistic that just because Trump is back in office, they are not going to change the way they might vote on a case simply because Trump is in office. Remember, they have lifetime appointments. And anytime you start hearing people, suggesting potentially impeaching Supreme Court justices, that's just nonsense. That's not going to happen. So, to me, no, I actually do not believe that Trump being back in office will change how any of the justices will vote. I believe the court's makeup is pretty clear, and I don't see any deviation from that just because of Trump's win.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess, Alison, with the White House, the US Senate, the Supreme Court, and possibly the House of Representatives under major control by Republicans, What do you see in the future for us with age verification?
That's a good question. We're talking a lot about the federal level, and clearly that is super important. But I think, if you look at the blog post that we put out this morning, I think we're going to see some more enforcement efforts by the states that have passed these laws. There are now 19 of them total. They're all in effect, other than a couple that will go into effect in January and other times in 2025. So on the state level, I think you are going to see attempts to enforce those laws against companies. And I still think that there are a handful of states that are going to try to pass more of these laws in the next session. And a lot of this, to bring it back to the federal level, is going to hinge on our Supreme Court case. So we are indeed going to be having oral arguments in January, on January 15th. And the stakes are pretty high. The general idea that restrictions on speech that are based on the content of that speech have to withstand the strictest of rules. Like, essentially, you can't do them unless they're really important, there's a compelling interest, and there's no less restrictive way to do it. If the Supreme Court were to change that standard, it would have pretty significant impacts, not just on the adult industry, but on First Amendment freedom overall. So it's hard to overstate what the stakes are here. But thing is, it probably won't be decided until late June. So we've got a whole half of a year for legislators to continue pushing these policies. On the federal level as well, or a Republican trifecta could actually mean that age verification could get traction in Congress. I think a name that you're going to hear a lot in the coming days, weeks, hopefully not years, is Senator Mike Lee of Utah. He is probably the most prolific anti-porn sponsor of legislation in Congress. He's, of course, sponsored the age verification bill called the Screen Act. It might get like the award for best backronym, though, because it's actually short for Shielding Children's Retinas from Egregious Exposure on the Net. So you got to give him credit for that. But I could see something like that getting traction in the next Congress, if only because now there's a majority to vote it through.
Yeah, and what an acronym. I mean, will the FSC be changing its strategy in light of the election results?
Well,
with all in mind?
No, it's a reasonable question. I think fundamentally our industry is a political target regardless of which party's in power. And FSC's mission is the same, is to protect the rights and freedoms of the adult industry. So, while the tactics might be different for a Republican majority, our strategy itself doesn't really change much, which is to say, thinking about what might be coming, we're actually hoping to make some progress on banking fairness. One of the things the Trump administration did right before leaving office was to finalize a rule that required banks to do risk assessments of individual customers rather than just like debanking entire groups or businesses because of the industry that they're associated with. So if they wanted to bring back the fair access rule, that would be great. And we will certainly be lobbying for that. On the flip side, we are concerned that the policies that are already being pushed by conservatives to hurt the adult industry and its workers are going to have more traction. And I think I group them personally into three buckets, more or less. So the first one is kind of restrictions on access to adult content in the name of protecting the children, which, you know, we already see in the form of the age verification laws. But there are a handful of proposals floating around to do things like restricting access or restricting adult websites to specific domains. For those who've been around long enough to remember the .xxx controversy, unbelievably, that's a policy still being pushed by some Trump allies. There's also ample opportunity to weigh taxes on our industry. Alabama, as part of its age verification law, actually included a pretty insane tax on creators and producers and distributors of any kind of porn. So that's bucket one. I think the next bucket is trafficking. And I put that in square quotes or scare quotes because folks in the conservative movement equate all sex work with trafficking. We know that that is absolutely not the case. So our friend Mike Lee also has a bill that would redefine consent and put extremely burdensome requirements on companies to prove they have gotten consent from performers or face criminal penalties. I just threw that in the chat. And the language of trafficking and this language of consent is sort of how folks have laundered, you know, anti-porn legislation under the guise of concern. You know, it's not just about the children, it's all, you know, it's also about the poor women. Another option there would be for the DOJ to prioritize prosecuting the Mann Act, also known as the White Slave Traffic Act of 1910. It criminalizes transporting women for immoral purposes like prostitution. There are a lot of laws, just like, you know, the Comstock Act, kind of waiting around, maybe ready to be mobilized. And there's some consideration that if banking fairness were to move forward and concerns remained, banking regulators could target payment platforms or banks that do business with us under the pretense of fighting trafficking, which would obviously make that issue worse. And then the third bucket is obscenity. I know that not a lot of folks, although maybe a lot of folks in the chat, from the sound of it, remember the days of obscenity prosecutions. I sure do. And frankly, there are members of Congress, like Representative Jim Banks, who have called on the president to make prosecuting obscenity a priority. And not to mention, there's reason to think that, you know, the next administration might want to enforce Comstock or things like it. But I think Larry's going to go more in depth on this later on. So I will leave the prosecutions there. But there are some other proposals that Congress can act on theoretically to increase the threat. So our buddy Mike Lee also has a bill to redefine the definition of obscenity, basically making it easier to win convictions, because right now it is hard. It is very difficult to convince a jury that whatever the content is actually requires a thick fascination with sex to enjoy. In addition, there are things that they can do around the edges, like adding the ability for private individuals to sue creators of the content that they think are obscene, or, you know, maybe even do it as a class action. That's on the table, or maybe stripping 230 immunity for obscenity, which would kind of have a similar result, because it would allow for private lawsuits over that kind of content. But fundamentally, what's important, I think, for me to say is that no matter what, FSC's mission is going to remain the same. And really, it's up to the industry to decide whether to support what we're doing. I hope so. I appreciate it.
We would like to continue supporting the FSC as much as possible, at least from my perspective. I'm sure most people in the chat feel quite similarly.
Yeah, there's a lot of organizations, Clara, that are here and have been working hard. And Allison is being very modest because she always has been. She's always shown a lot of class, and frankly, she's always been a role model for many people in the industry. And she's not doing what she can do if she wants to, and that's, of course, you know, guys, it sucks to be putting hands out and asking for money, but the Free Speech Coalition, the Woodhill Freedom Foundation, Pineapple Support, these organizations need the industry's dollars. Let's call it for what it is. They need it so that they can continue to exist. Savannah is going to be talking about New Moon. She'll be talking about her organization also in a little bit, so you'll be hearing about what she's been up to. So there's a lot of organizations, and Allison's did an absolutely, you know, beautiful presentation there, except for not asking for people who aren't members for the FSC to get your butts in gear and join. So, you know, we need these organizations, guys, because otherwise we're not going to be able to fight it. You know, most recently, the Woodhill Freedom Foundation's fight. We filed. Larry Walters and I are representing Woodhill Freedom Foundation and the EFF in its amicus brief against the Texas age verification bill. That was actually made possible by Mojo Host. Mojo Host put up all the dollars necessary for the Woodhill Freedom Foundation to be able to afford to take this on. We need, you know, more people like Mojo Host to, you know, step up, do their part, and join all these great organizations. So back to you, Clara. I like saying that. It's like a pretending like I'm on a news broadcast or something.
We might as well be today.
Yeah.
And I guess, Larry, Allison was mentioning the obscenity laws and prosecutions, and I really wanted to ask, what are the chances of a return to obscenity prosecutions? How do you see that world and, you know, obscenity laws in general? Could the Trump administration change the game as a whole for obscenity laws?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important discussion to have. Obscenity has always been kind of the boogeyman out there for the adult industry because it's something that can rear its head at any time without notice and can be difficult to predict, difficult to determine, you know, what content may be found obscene in one jurisdiction or another. There have actually been cases where there have been convictions and acquittals on the very same film within the same state on obscenity charges. So, you know, it is a very unpredictable law, vague and overbroad. You know, the law as interpreted by the Supreme Court has withstood constitutional challenges. And, you know, most states and the federal system does have a prohibition on distribution or sending, receiving obscene material. I frankly think that, you know, it will be difficult for the government to go back to the Reagan-Bush era of having an obscenity prosecution unit. Some of us here on the panel and in the chat are old enough to remember that, where they were just, you know, rounding up different producers and hitting them with obscenity charges in different parts of the country, admittedly to wear down and spread thin the limited number of First Amendment lawyers that were able to defend these cases. And there's even less of them around now, as many of them have aged out. But PHE, a well-known adult company, sued the Department of Justice and actually got a good ruling against them, against that kind of tactic of, you know, targeting and harassing adult companies for an improper purpose. Hey, if you're gonna, you know, pursue an obscenity case, that's one thing, but to try to drain the legal talent across the country is a whole nother type of bad faith governmental conduct. But look, you know, there's a possibility that the Trump era could revert to obscenity prosecutions with with having enough of a mandate if they feel that that's a viable approach. Thinking back to the sort of the end of the obscenity prosecutions after the Reagan-Bush era and into Obama, the government suffered some very embarrassing losses. As Alison was alluding to, it's getting harder and harder to convince a jury to put somebody in jail for making a film that everybody consented to be in and that everybody who saw it consented to watch. The only people in an obscenity case that view the content non-consensually is the jury, who are forced to watch it. And so it became obvious that it was kind of a waste of taxpayer money. It was embarrassing to the Department of Justice because they like to win cases. They win over 99% of their cases, and they were losing obscenity cases, and it wasn't looking good for them. There were actually some U.S. attorneys who were refusing to take the cases and saying to the main justice in D.C., no, we're not taking on this prosecution, go somewhere else. And they would have to shop for attorney generals, U.S. attorneys that would actually be willing to take the cases. So it got very hard, given the proliferation of adult content on the internet, particularly to get convictions in obscenity cases. And all of that's still true. What else is true is that obscenity is defined by the U.S. Supreme Court under the Miller test. And that was created as a constitutional definition of obscenity. In other words, the First Amendment requires that these certain standards be met in order to convict somebody of obscenity. And it's a very difficult test for the prosecution to meet. There's a lot of variables involving community standards and patent defensiveness and prurient interest that can lend itself to expert testimony and defenses and so forth. So I don't think that's going to change. As much as Senator Lee might want to introduce a new bill for a new definition of obscenity, the court has made clear that this is the definition of obscenity. It's required by the First Amendment, and I would suspect that any attempted change would not fare well in the courts. Certainly, the U.S. Supreme Court could just abandon its entire test that has been in place for decades and that they have reaffirmed over and over in numerous cases, saying this is the test. We're not going to change it. We're not going to change it. Yeah, could they decide to do something new and revamp the definition of obscenity? Certainly possible. I don't think it's likely, and I think that the existing Miller test is excellent protection for the adult industry, even if an attempted resolution or resurrection of the obscenity squad was attempted. And there's First Amendment lawyers who are there to fight. There are people with experience. We've been there before. We're ready to do it again if they decide to go down that road.
So it doesn't sound like you see there being a return of the obscenity task force the way it was then.
I think it would be ill-advised for the administration to do that. I think that they could set themselves up for, again, a series of losses and public humiliation by doing so. Doesn't mean that somebody might not be convinced to try, right? But the existing constitutional protections, the Miller test, the First Amendment, are in place to push back on that and to ensure that only certain materials that are beyond the pale of what's accepted in society would be deemed to be obscene. And after those losses that I mentioned, after the obscenity unit was disbanded after Reagan-Bush, there have been very few obscenity cases. We've seen one involving bestiality. We've seen one involving public content, public nudity, where basically the state couldn't figure out what else to charge, and that ultimately took a plea to disorderly conduct. So really nobody's trying it anymore. Even here in Central Florida, where we had Polk County, famous Polk County, and Grady Judd, who was prosecuting everybody for obscenity in the late 90s, early 2000s. Even he's given up the effort. It's become very difficult. So I think the chances are fairly slim. But I also believe that the industry is ready to take on that fight if we need to.
I have one last quick question for you. I really do appreciate you answering with all of that. During Trump's first term, was there any actual targeted action against the adult industry other than Trump signing FOSTA SESTA?
Not really. Obviously, FOSTA SESTA was a gut punch to the industry and to service providers and online platforms, many of them who shut down or closed down sections of dating sites and so forth. So it was a significant action. I would say that FOSTA SESTA as a concept had support, bipartisan support. Certainly wasn't a Trump idea or a Republican idea. The concept had been tossed around even before that administration. So it was kind of one of those things where it was bound to happen at some point, no matter who was in the White House at the time. But certainly it did happen under Trump, and it was and continues to be a very difficult piece of legislation, allowing these civil suits and criminal enforcement. Interestingly, though, there's only been one criminal charge brought under FOSTA SESTA against a platform named City X Guide, escort-oriented platform. So for all the fanfare and how this is a urgently needed law to shut down all these bad actors, they haven't found many bad actors. They haven't initiated many prosecutions. Now it's been a boon for the trial lawyers. There's been a number of plaintiffs, class action lawsuits against adult platforms that are, trying to seek millions of dollars in compensation for alleged victims of trafficking. But those are fought on a case-by-case basis. They're proceeding through the system. The courts are actually rendering some good rulings to narrow the scope of the platforms that can be lawfully targeted under FOSTA SESTA. The Woodhull Freedom Foundation's challenge resulted in a narrowing construction of that law. Reddit came through and litigated a case which resulted in the same kind of thing, requiring actual knowledge and active participation with traffickers for a platform to be held liable. So those are positive developments. Not a great law, to be sure. It's caused a lot of consternation in the industry and a lot of self-censorship. But aside from that, there really wasn't a targeting of the adult industry. You saw some bills pop up now and again, but they were quickly dispatched. I think that this time around, there's a better chance of those types of bills gaining traction, as Alison was mentioning, particularly in age verification and consent requirements, CSAM, liability for platforms, potentially this redefinition of obscenity. There's a better chance of that legislation gaining some traction. But we didn't see a lot of it during the first Trump term.
Yeah.
Larry, I'm
Thank
going to
you.
take Corey's invitation to jump in and ask you, do you think that a Trump administration's DOJ might make SESTA FOSTA prosecutions more of a priority?
That's certainly a possibility, and I think it's important that you raise that. So far, we've not seen much enforcement of FOSTA SESTA criminally, as I mentioned. There is a requirement that reports be made under FOSTA SESTA as to how often these cases are brought and their results. So the requirement of reporting on those kinds of things provides an incentive for more cases to be brought. Otherwise, why did we go through this whole effort to pass this law if no criminal charges are being brought? So there is a more significant chance of heightened enforcement. However, that is mitigated by the Reddit and Woodhull decisions that impose a pretty high standard when attempting to impose liability on an online platform for trafficking and requiring that actual knowledge and active participation. The one part of FOSTA SESTA that we haven't really seen litigated is, what is the standard to hold a platform liable for facilitating or promoting prostitution? That is, one that was touched on in the Woodhull case. It seems like the court would go in that same direction of requiring, some sort of actual knowledge and specific intended promotion of a person, as opposed to, generally promoting the concept of prostitution or advocating for decriminalization of prostitution. So the courts have put up some guardrails, but we are potentially going to see some additional criminal enforcement of the statute.
And something to note also, is Alison, that is a great question, is that also remember, guys, and I want everyone to remember as we're going through these discussions that for as long as at least I've been in the industry and as long as I've studied the history of the adult industry, we have been one of the most targeted industries in the world over and over again by governments, by right-wing conservative groups, by religious groups, and the list goes on and on as to who have targeted us. But I want to remind everyone that's here is that contrary to every time they've come after us and tried to kill us, they have failed over and over and over again. And one thing that I'm so impressed with so far today is the way this group is talking, and even the questions that are going on in the chat here. I love the fact that you guys are raising these issues and talking about this. But let me remind you all that they've been trying this for as long as adult entertainment has existed, and as long as sex workers have existed, and they have failed over and over again because, frankly, lawyers like myself and Larry and the Free Speech Coalition and the Woodhull Freedom Foundation and all the other great organizations and companies and people that are here today, we're not just going to stand back if, more of these ridiculous regulations come back. Larry's right. Yeah, there certainly is the potential, for maybe this administration trying to utilize some of these laws, but we'll be ready. And we're not just going to sit back and say, okay, that's not what the plan here is. I know the FSC's been planning. I know that Larry and I have been hard at work with our clients, preparing them and having plan B, C, D, and E. So don't for a second, guys, think that, we're in a situation here where anyone is going to come in and knock down the adult entertainment industry. That's not going to happen. We've survived the fight throughout history, and we're ready for what comes next.
And a lot of people in the chat have been asking about Project 2025, and I think this is a great point to pull you back in, Savannah. Emotions have been really running wild through the creator and sex work community for obvious reasons. What would your message be to those that are struggling with their feelings, be it like anger, despondency, fear?
I'd say that those emotions are 100% valid. Some sex workers are feeling jubilant because sex workers are not a political monolith. They possess a lot of different political perspectives. That said, I know that I am disappointed, and I know that a lot of my colleagues are not just disappointed, but really frightened, and justifiably so. It's true that the adult industry will survive. Sex will always sell. They can never crush us or thwart us completely. But the people who have the most to lose are individual sex workers, especially more marginalized sex workers whose very lives have been used as a wedge issue in this recent election. I'm thinking of our trans community members. I'm thinking of people of color and racism in the sex trade and how people don't get paid as much. People are going to be really scraping by. And so I think that anger is warranted. It's okay to be upset, but I think that a good use of your energy, as opposed to attacking one of another, would be to redirect it on reaching out to your colleagues who might be struggling even more in this time with their mental health, looking to your local sex worker organizations and seeing how you can join or help them. A lot of sex worker organizations distribute what's called mutual aid, which is usually small cash amounts to help people who are really trying to survive day to day or stay housed or feed their kids. That's a great use of your energy right now, and also to prepare. We're going to talk about Project 2025. A lot of people here have experienced SESTA FOSTA. SESTA FOSTA, there might have not been a lot of prosecutions, but it certainly had a really crushing impact on individual sex workers who no longer had a place to go and find clients online. We lost all of our online advertising sites, or most of them. And so that puts people in a place of extreme instability financially. It's also hard on their mental health, and they can feel isolated. And so what a lot of us learned during SESTA FOSTA, and we can go ahead and revisit these good lessons, is to diversify your income as much as you can. Make sure that you're downloading all of your assets, that you upload to things like OnlyFans or Clips for Sale. Own all of your own media. Put it on an external hard drive, back up that hard drive, download your client and fan contacts, get their email addresses, whatever your preferred contact method is, because if you lose your platform and you lose contact to all your clients, like SESTA FOSTA did for in-person sex workers, you're going to be in a place of deep stress and instability. And you can fortify yourself now by planning ahead in case things like that come to pass.
And so, would you be suggesting that people should be filling out job applications for like mainstream works, like jobs? Would you suggest that like those fears are justified, that people move outside of sex work?
That's a really individual decision. I think it's always a good idea to not put all your eggs in one basket. The adult industry has operated in extreme precarity forever, as we've been talking about. It's always under attack. For individual sex workers, Plan for a rainy day, plan for the worst, try and keep your resume updated with volunteer gigs. Again, this is where your local sex worker organizations can be helpful so that you don't have big resume gaps. If you wanted to expand your skill set so that you're ready to change jobs, you can, but also diversify platforms. Because one platform might go down. I don't think you need to be filling out job applications right now unless you yourself feel so stressed out that you need to do it for your own mental health. Because it shouldn't be understated how much of an impact just thinking about all this can have on us. So I don't think our jobs are going away. They haven't been criminalized yet. Trump isn't in office yet. He will be. We'll talk about Project 2025, but I think it's always a good idea to have a plan B.
And I really do appreciate that. I know everyone does. And mental health specifically is something to keep in mind in terms of the decisions that you make in general. And I think with Project 2025, there's been a lot of misunderstandings about what is and what isn't. Would you be willing to help explain a bit about what the Heritage Foundation is, and that Project 2025 is not the law, but a bit more of a dossier or a wish list?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Project 2025 is not the law. A lot of us have heard about it by now. It is not just a wish list, but a playbook to install an ultra-conservative far-right government through the Trump administration and to make America back into a fine Christian nation. But it's not just about sex and morality. Project 2025 also looks to eradicate the Department of Education or privatize Social Security or abolish minimum wage. It would affect every single person living in this country in many aspects of our life if it was all just implemented with a magic wand. Now, it hasn't been implemented. Again, it's a playbook. It's from something called the Heritage Foundation, which I think of as an ultra-conservative far-right think tank. And my understanding is that the reason it was created was Heritage Foundation was hoping that Trump would win, and then they want to provide more structure and direction for the Trump administration to start implementing items off this wish list. Trump has said publicly, oh, Project 2025, we're not going to do that. I personally don't trust him when he says things like that, but Project 2025 has many, many people and minds and committees behind it, has many powerful donors. And it also, part of the playbook is to use the Trump administration to try and fire tens of thousands of civil servants and install them with MAGA loyalists. So once they get all that structure in place, if they're able to do it, then they can start cherry picking which laws they want to pass. And some of those will affect the adult industry directly if they're successful. But again, to reiterate, none of this is law yet, and we don't really know what's going to happen with it. And I'd love to hear from other panelists if they have different views on it.
Well, Ari Saunders just made she brought up a good comment in the chat, and she was, basically saying that, if porn was to become criminalized, would there be a decent amount of time for this to happen? The answer to your question, Ari, is, first of all, I do not believe that porn is going to be criminalized. I believe there are substantial amounts of legal boundaries, including the First Amendment, the Supreme Court case precedent. I just don't see it happening. But to answer your question, because it is a fair question, no, this would not be an overnight thing. This would be a large-scale debated issue that would be heavily covered by media outlets, heavily litigated. This would not be an overnight thing. This would be, quite candidly, years and years and years.
So to be more specific, Corey, Congress passes bill, porn is banned, and everybody jump in if you want to. Next step.
Well, first Congress, someone's going to have to propose the bill.
Yeah. Let's say that we failed to stop this bill somehow. It's looking like it's gonna, Trump's about to sign it.
Yep.
I know what FSC would be doing, and it would be working with lawyers. So tell me what lawyers are going to do in that case.
We'll be suing quickly. We'll be suing quickly, and in any such attempt to try to make an outright ban on pornography. And again, guys, it's, I don't want to get into the nuances of what would constitute pornography, because frankly, we'll be here for months getting into that nuance. But ultimately, the First Amendment would stand in its way, Alison. I do not believe that such a law would ever be able to withstand both Supreme Court precedent and the First Amendment. We would challenge it immediately. This would be something that probably both Larry and I would be tripping over each other trying to get to the damn file button. We would be with all of our clients and industry people in joining that war, because that would be the most outrageous, ridiculous notion that I could possibly think of. But this would be, the legal challenge of legal challenges, which we would take on. And I'm confident that I'm very confident that there is virtually no chance of such a law passing. But again, I'm an optimist, and I want to be optimistic here today, because, like I said when we started today, I wanted to you guys to come into this, and I wanted to take some of the angst down. I know, a lot of people have not been sleeping. A lot of people have been really upset, and I don't believe that I personally do not believe this is a real possibility. But do I believe that, we're going to see some tightening up, Allison? And do I believe that we're going to see some interesting things getting snuck in here and there for some of these wish list items that the Heritage Foundation wants, and all the points that Savannah just said? Savannah, I'm sorry. I knew I was going to do that at some point. No, I think we're absolutely going to see it. As we've seen throughout history, Allison, we've seen that the right-wing conservatives always tend to sneak in something related to adult and like some completely unrelated bill. Like, they'll be trying to legislate how to peel a banana, and for some reason there'll be something related to porn in there, and it's stuck in the middle of it. We've seen that before, and that's why it's so important, Allison, that we're vigilant and that we're watching for this stuff. And you guys, the FSC has been phenomenal at it. I know from my conversations with Savannah, she alone has been incredible at it, on top of what the Wood Health Freedom Foundation has been doing. But I'm very optimistic. And, Larry, maybe you put two lawyers in a room, you might get three different opinions. Maybe Larry differs with me, but I do not see a, federal outright ban on pornography. I don't see it happening.
Savannah, I think you had your hand up, so.
I was just going to say, but where there's a will, there's a way. And with this new administration and the Heritage Foundation and all these people with all these values they want to force upon us, like age verification laws are a way to ban porn without outright banning porn. I feel like we're going to see more things like that, creative ways to make it harder to do business, less profitable.
Yes, I agree with that, Savannah.
Dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would add there is that I would anticipate a certain political cost to driving something like that through. There are a lot of people in this country that like porn, and they're going to be pushing back politically. And is that how an administration wants to spend its political capital? That's an interesting question, but it's too much of a fringe issue, in my view, to spend all that potential political capital. And then you get groups like Hollywood involved, and large producers that could be affected by whatever they call porn, and you've got big money coming in to push back on it. So I think it wouldn't just be the adult industry that would have a problem with something banning porn. It would be a large scale industry pushback.
But to be fair, those organizations representing mainstream movies have supported age verification laws, provided they only target porn. So we always welcome friends.
What bugs me the most about it, Allison, I'll tell you, it drove me nuts during Fosta Sesta, and it drove me insane. I at least wish that the far-right conservatives would just come out when they create these laws and just say what it is, instead of pretending like it's something that it isn't. For example, again, Fosta Sesta, which, they said it was all about, protecting human trafficking and children and all that. No, it was a right-wing agenda to try to, as Savannah said, get very creative in terms of squeezing the sex worker market. And it's the same thing with the age verification bills. And that's some of the arguments that the FSC has been making across the country. I know Larry and I, also made that argument in our briefing as well, that it's calling age verification really an age verification bill is a bunch of horse shit. It's a means at content restriction. Everybody knows it. They just don't want to say it, but I'll say it.
And I think at this stage, since it's been a nice hour, I think it would be a great time for us to get started on asking or answering people's questions in the chat here. There were quite a few, so if there was any that stuck out to any of you that you'd like to answer, I'd be happy to let you guys start first.
Whoever types in their question first gets it. Here comes the race. Let's see who's the quickest typer in the room.
Well,
Well, I
really, I
think
meant if like Larry, Allison, or Savannah had seen anything that stuck out to them,
yeah,
this would be a great time to call out the answers or reply to people. There were some
some of
really,
the
really
ones.
great questions and a lot of them, so.
Definitely. Excellent questions from the entire attendance. The one that stuck out to me raised Section 230, which we didn't talk too much about, a little bit indirectly with Pastas Esta, but questioning whether or not the Reno case would stand under the current Supreme Court and the future of Section 230. It's Section 230 has been embattled. There is a potential for the protection that is offered to online service providers and platforms to be tinkered with by Congress. There have been a bunch of bills, a bunch of efforts. Both Trump and Biden have, at certain times called for changes to Section 230 for different reasons. So I would look for that to be a potential flashpoint in the upcoming term. But I would mention that Section 230 really embodies First Amendment principles. So, there's a good argument that you don't necessarily need Section 230 to do what it does. It codified essentially First Amendment law as applied to distributors of third-party speech. So, if Congress does act and change or strip Section 230 immunity, I think there would be a viable argument that the protection exists still under the First Amendment.
I have a question for Savannah, because Savannah, you have your, let's say, your boots on the ground. You're entwined in terms of, I know a lot of people have been reaching out to you, and obviously we're, concerned as they should be. Do you think, Savannah, that this sentiment is going to kind of go down a little bit? Do you think that do you think that things are getting a little bit, call it more tense? I mean, just what are, in terms of your pulse on kind of the current sentiment?
I think that people are flashing back to 2016 when they felt unprepared for a Trump win and maybe surprised. And now they're less surprised, but they've been through this before. We're seeing a lot of information going around for immigrants because of Trump's appointment of his border czar and all his statements about mass deportation of immigrants. We have a lot of migrants in our adult industry community. So getting them information about their rights, if ICE comes knocking on their door, things like that. We're seeing the circulation of information for trans individuals of going and getting your passport now, try and get your gender marker set because it might not be possible to do that in a couple of months or a year. So I think that people are frightened. But I think that people are also, they're either lashing out, which I understand. I don't think it's the most productive use of your energy, but people are also mobilizing and trying to figure out how to best protect themselves and their colleagues who are at risk of being harmed.
Yeah, I like that right there, that word you use, Savannah, mobilizing, having discussion. This is one of the reasons why, this particular group of panelists, why this is such an important topic to all of us, because we're having a civilized, open dialogue, and this is what I absolutely love, and that's great. I think the industry should continue to mobilize. We didn't mention Pineapple Support earlier. Both Allison and I serve on the Pineapple Support board, and Pineapple Support was created specifically to help sex workers who are going through any sort of issue that they believe they want to talk to someone, reach out for any sort of assistance, help, whatever. I didn't do a good service by earlier not mentioning them earlier, but when Savannah was just talking, they popped into my mind as an organization that you should all be paying attention to as well, and they're there to help through these difficult times. Clara, how are we doing with questions? Did I miss anyone? The chat is going so fast. It's hard. It's hard to.
We've got a pretty good one. I think this one is one me and Savannah and Allison can kind of answer. Ari asked, what's the most important message to spread on socials and to friends at this point? What should we be encouraging our community to do? And I think, at least from my perspective, it should be continuing to support organizations. Find your friends, find your community, talk to each other, share information. And Savannah and Allison, I think you guys might have some more things to add to that too. There's quite a few organizations to support.
Sorry, my dog has allergies. Go ahead, Savannah.
Well, yeah, we have, if you want to know about sex worker led and serving organizations in your region at New Moon, we have a map of our grantees. It's about 70 plus groups. We know that there's about 200 such groups in the US, give or take. But this is a list where you can at least start to look. If you're curious about groups in your region, you're welcome to reach out to us through our website and say, hey, I live in this part of the country. I'm looking for my local group. Don't isolate, Clara. I totally agree. We need to be getting together, sharing information, sharing strategies, and not getting too stuck in our heads right now.
Yeah, for what it's worth, Clara's trade show season is coming up. A lot of you are starting to make your plans for the January trade shows, and I'll be there. Larry will be in attendance as well. I believe Clara will be there. Savannah will be there. Allison will be there in some manner. But I encourage all of you also to continue having these discussions, in person like this, and feel free to. Anyone who's in this group, I mean, I'm looking at the names here. You guys are all, industry leaders and great people. You got to have this dialogue. You got to keep having these conversations. And this is where the good ideas come from. This is where, the dialogue is going to start. We have to stick together. We are a small industry. In the grand scheme of things, we do have to remember that the sex industry, relative to a lot of the other, industries, we are relatively small. And so it's important that we're continuing this dialogue, both in person, on sessions like this, and of course, talking, when you're supporting organizations like the FSC, donating money is great. But, one thing that you might not know about Allison is she's actually very social and she's always happy to chat. So yeah, she's giving me faces now. So make sure you guys are reaching out, because, ideas are a great starting point to coming up with potential solutions. So, Clara.
I'm trying to see. There are quite a few comments, but I'm starting to run out of questions that I was seeing people post.
Well,
was there anything that stuck out to any of you?
No, my biggest thing and the biggest message for today, I think we're getting close to, starting to wrap up for today, but the biggest thing that I really wanted to do today is I wanted all of you who are there, who are here. It's been a very polarized couple of months, a couple years. It's probably more accurate, Savannah. It's been very polarized, and the emotions are running wild, and I really wanted people to be able to come in here today and listen to these experts, Savannah and Clara and Allison and Larry. These are your experts, guys, with their ears to the ground. And, yes, our guard needs to be up. We are not blind to the fact that we have some bumpy roads ahead, but this is not the end of the industry. This is not the end of sex work. They can try, but we're going to do everything we can as long as we're breathing to stop it. And the comments, I mean, some of you have been, Allison's been trying to respond to a lot of you as quick as she can type, and your comments are incredible. I'm so appreciative that you guys, are taking the time to be part of this today. So I have to, first of all, real quick, I have to go back and thank our sponsors one more time. I can't thank Colin and Angie enough. Great topic. I mean, and you guys have seen Colin's contributions online. He's obviously been talking a lot about his feelings, and that's awesome. Thanks, XBiz, for the exclusive media sponsor. I do want to go around the room real quick, though, Clara. I want all of our speakers to take a second to share how people can get a hold of them if anyone wants to chat with them afterwards.
Yeah, Savannah, do you want to start?
Sure, you can reach me through the New Moon Network website or on Twitter, just at Savannah Sly. But before I go, I did want to encourage if there are any current or former sex workers on the call, I know there are, I hope there are. Woodhull and New Moon have a collaborative program for you. I'm dropping it in the chat. It's called Spokes Hub, and it is a online peer learning advocacy academy. So if you want to fight back, if you want to get organized, if you want to know how to talk to the media or how a bill moves through the legislature or anything like that, these are free classes. Go ahead and check it out. And if you graduate the program, we actually offer cash stipends to advocates who are out there advancing sex workers' rights, because we feel that work should be supported. So go ahead and check out Spokes Hub. I'll drop it one more time in the busy chat. And thanks for having me today.
Thank you for being here. Allison?
Well, for personal, I don't know, mental health reasons, I don't really do social media, but do feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is in the chat. I'm Alison at freespeechcoalition.com. If you have questions that I didn't get a chance to answer, if you want to talk more about any of the bills, if you have questions about what membership means, whatever it is, hit me up.
Larry?
You can reach me through firstamendment.com, which is our website, and at Walters Law Group on social media. Thanks again to our sponsors and to our panelists. Really appreciate the time and everybody's attendance. And hopefully you learned something and feel a little bit better.
Thank you again, Larry. My name is the Clara Kitty on social media. You guys can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and also TikTok. And thank you guys again to everyone who showed up to chat with us. We really appreciate your time and attention. Corey?
And yeah, I want to thank my panelists. Again, these are some of my favorite people in the industry. I can't, there really aren't words to describe how tirelessly you guys work, and how proud I am of all of you to be on this panel with you guys today. If anybody needs to get a hold of me, you can reach out to me on social media at my adult attorney, or you can email me, Corey@silversteinlegal.com, or you can just open up a window, shout as loud as you can, and hope that I hear you, but that probably won't work. We will continue this legal impact series. You will see Allison, Savannah, Larry, and Clara back again. And but thank you all, for those of you that are here today, and for those of you that are now watching this on YouTube. Thank you all. We wouldn't be here without you guys. And like all of my colleagues said here today, we have no intention of stop fighting as long as you guys want to keep creating adult entertainment. We're not going anywhere. Back to you, Clara.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you guys have a lovely day. Again, we appreciate your time, your attention, all of your comments, and this was a wonderful legal impact webinar. We were really glad to get to be able to speak to all of you and try and make all of you feel a little bit less anxious about what's happening in the world.